My son-in-law made a toast at his law school reunion dinner and called me a retired handyman who couldn't figure out what to do with himself. What he didn't know was that 41 guests at that table, including 2 sitting federal judges and the dean of Hartfield Law, already knew exactly who I was, and none of them were going to correct him. They were waiting for me to do it myself. That evening changed everything. But to understand why, you need to know what the 3 years before it looked like. My daughter married my son-in-law on a Saturday in October, 4 years ago. I remember standing at the back of the church while she walked toward him, thinking he looked like a man who had rehearsed that smile. He was a second-year associate at a firm downtown, the kind of place with its name in brass letters on the lobby wall. His family had money the old-fashioned way, inherited and reinvested, generation after generation. His father had been a city councilman. His mother chaired the board of a hospital foundation. They were the kind of people who assume the world has always been theirs, and nothing in their experience had ever suggested otherwise. I wore my good navy blazer to that wedding. I drove my 2016 pickup with the cracked passenger mirror. I sat with my wife at the family table and shook hands with his parents and said polite things about the venue. His mother asked me what I did. I told her I was semi-retired, running a small tile and renovation business out of a shop on Desmond Street. "How practical," she said. The way she smiled, you'd think I'd told her I collected aluminum cans. I let it go. You do. At first. The first real incident happened about 7 months into the marriage. My daughter had invited us over for Sunday dinner. Just the 4 of us. Casual, nothing formal. My son-in-law had spent the weekend golfing with partners from his firm. He was in a good mood, loose, the kind of mood that makes certain men careless. He was telling a story about a client, some construction company that had bungled a downtown renovation project. The lawsuit was a mess. He went on about contractors, how they underbid, cut corners, never thought past the next job. "No offense," he said, looking at me, "but the industry just attracts a certain type. People who aren't built for long-term thinking." My wife's hand found my knee under the table. "None taken," I said, and refilled my glass. My daughter changed the subject. He didn't notice he'd said anything wrong. The second incident was at a firm cocktail party the following spring. My daughter had asked us to come, said it would mean a lot to her. My son-in-law had just been named junior partner. Big news. The firm rented out the top floor of a hotel downtown. Good bourbon, real flowers. The kind of party designed to confirm that the people inside it had arrived. He introduced my wife warmly. He introduced me as his father-in-law, who runs a small home improvement operation. Not inaccurate, but the pause after it, the slight upward tilt of his chin, that was the signal he sent to every colleague within earshot. A signal that said, not one of us. One of the other partners, a man named Gideon Forsyth, thick neck, cufflinks, the laugh of someone who learned it at a business school, leaned toward my son-in-law and said, "Good to have the trades represented. Who does my kitchen?" And they both smiled. I went to the bar and ordered a club soda. My daughter appeared beside me a few minutes later. "Dad, I know. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's his night." But I watched her face for the rest of the evening. The way she kept track of me from across the room. The way she laughed a half-beat too loud at things people said. She was working, managing 2 worlds that weren't supposed to rub against each other. The third incident happened in my own living room. My son-in-law had been working on a complex land use case for the city, something involving zoning appeals, historic designations, environmental review. He knew I'd once worked construction near that district. He came over one afternoon to talk through some of the physical aspects of the project with me. After about 20 minutes, he stopped taking notes and leaned back. "You know," he said, "you actually have decent instincts about structure. For someone without a formal background." My wife was in the kitchen. I heard her set something down. "Thank you," I said. "It's a compliment. Not everyone who works with their hands has the spatial reasoning to think analytically about systems. You're an exception." I nodded slowly. What he didn't know, what I had never told him, had never told almost anyone outside of a small group of professionals bound by confidentiality agreements, was that I had spent 23 years as a licensed structural engineer. Not just licensed. I had been the lead engineer on 14 major infrastructure projects across 4 states. I had testified before a congressional subcommittee on seismic retrofitting standards in 2009. I had co-authored guidelines that were still being used by the Department of Transportation. My name was on a bridge, but after a career like that, I wanted peace. I wanted something with my hands, something I could finish in a day, something where I could see the completed thing before I drove home. My wife and I had moved to a quieter city, and I'd set up a small tile and renovation shop that I ran with one helper named Augusto. It was honest work. I liked it. My son-in-law had never asked about my background. He had looked at my truck and my shop and my worn work boots and concluded I was not worth asking, so I let him believe it. Partly because there was no clean moment to correct it, partly because I was curious how long he would keep going. But mostly because my daughter had started to look tired in a way that worried me, and I didn't want to add more friction to what was already a strained dynamic. That changed about 6 weeks before the reunion dinner. My daughter called me on a Tuesday morning. I was at the shop reordering grout. She didn't say hello. He doesn't want you at the dinner. I put down the catalog. What dinner? His 10-year law school reunion. It's at the faculty club at Hartfield. Black tie, sit down, the whole thing. He told me last night he thinks it'll be awkward, that his colleagues won't know how to talk to you. I stood very still. What did you say? I told him you were my father and you were coming, and he said. She stopped. I could hear her breathing. What did he say? He said, I just don't want to have to explain the handyman to a room full of attorneys. I set down the phone for a moment, not to compose myself. I was perfectly composed. I set it down because I wanted to make a decision carefully. I picked it back up. Tell him we'll be there. She was quiet. Dad, you don't have to. Tell him we'll be there, and don't worry about me. What she didn't know, what I hadn't mentioned to her, because it genuinely hadn't seemed important until now, was that I had delivered a keynote address at Hartfield Law's Spring Symposium 11 months earlier. The topic was public infrastructure liability and professional responsibility. The dean, a woman named Constance Ibarra, had introduced me personally. She'd read from my congressional testimony. There had been a reception afterward where I'd spent an hour talking shop with several of the faculty and 2 sitting judges who served on the school's advisory board. Some of those same people would be at the reunion dinner. I had not planned any of this. I want to be clear about that. I hadn't staged anything or made calls or set anything in motion. I simply knew what was about to happen, and I chose not to stop it. My wife said the night before the dinner, you could still say something. Warn him. He's had 3 years to ask a single question about who I am. She thought about that. Fair enough, she said. Wear the charcoal suit. The faculty club at Hartfield is an old building, dark wood and high ceilings, the kind of place that smells like old books and institutional pride. There were about 90 people at the reunion dinner. Round tables, candlelight, an open bar. My son-in-law and my daughter were already there when we arrived. He was in his element, handshakes and backslaps, the easy confidence of a man performing for an audience that already liked him. He spotted us and came over. He kissed my wife on the cheek. He shook my hand and managed to do it without quite looking at me. Glad you could make it, he said. Wouldn't miss it, I said. He steered my wife towards someone he wanted her to meet. I walked toward the bar, and that's when I heard my name. Holbrook? Vince Holbrook? I turned. It was Aldous Whitfer, one of the judges I'd met at the symposium. 70-something silver-haired, the kind of man who looked permanently amused by the world. Judge Whitfer. I shook his hand. I had no idea you'd be here tonight. What's the connection? My son-in-law is an alum, class of 15. He looked genuinely pleased. Well, small world, he lowered his voice. I still assign your testimony to my law students. The section on delegated responsibility in public contracts. Remarkable piece of work. That's kind of you. We talked for a few minutes. From across the room, I noticed my son-in-law watching. His expression was careful, trying to figure out how I knew a federal judge well enough for the judge to clap me on the shoulder and laugh at something I said. A few minutes later, Dean Ibarra found me near the windows. She was warm, direct, the kind of person who remembers everything. Vincent, she said. I didn't see your name on the guest list. Spouse of an alum. Ah. She glanced around the room. You know, I've been meaning to reach out. We're putting together a working group on infrastructure resilience for the spring semester. I'd love to talk to you about it. Call my office anytime. She moved on. I found our table. My wife was already seated, talking to someone's wife about gardens. I sat down and looked at the menu. My son-in-law slid into the seat beside me. His voice was quiet and tight. How do you know the dean? We've met a few times. A few times. And Judge Whitfer? We were introduced at a symposium. What symposium? Here, at the school. Last spring. He stared at me. You gave a talk here? A keynote, yes. About what? Infrastructure law, professional liability. He was very still. I watched him do the arithmetic, the judge, the dean, the keynote, and come up short on how to make it add up. You're a structural engineer, he said slowly. Not a question. A realization arriving too late. Retired, semi-retired. The shop keeps me busy. His jaw tightened. You never said anything. You never asked. Dinner began before he could respond. My son-in-law spent the first course barely eating. He was watching me. Every time someone at an adjacent table nodded in my direction, every time my wife said something that made someone laugh, he tracked it. I could see him recalibrating, trying to rebuild the picture. Then came the toasts. Several of his classmates spoke, warm, funny tributes to their years at Hartfield, their careers, their families. My son-in-law stood last. He'd clearly prepared something. He had notes on a small card. He began confidently, thanking the faculty, his classmates, his firm. He talked about the law as a calling, about the responsibility that came with the profession, and then he looked at me. I don't think he planned what came next. I think it was a reflex, the old reflex, the one that had served him comfortably for 3 years. I also want to acknowledge the people who support us who aren't in the profession, he said. Our families, people who've made different kinds of choices in life. My father-in-law is here tonight. He smiled at me. He's a man who's worked hard his whole life doing tile work and home renovation. And I've come to appreciate that there's dignity in every kind of work, even the kind that doesn't require a degree. Several people looked at me with polite expressions. The room was quiet. I felt my daughter go still beside me. I stood up. The room watched. My son-in-law's smile became uncertain. Thank you, I said. And since we're acknowledging things, I should mention that the tile work is a second act. The first one ran about 23 years. Structural engineering, mostly public infrastructure. I was lead engineer on the Kelmore Causeway renovation, the Grantham Rail Viaduct, a few others. I paused. I also testified before the Senate Subcommittee on Seismic Code Standards in 2009, which was an experience I don't recommend to anyone who values their Saturday mornings. Quiet laughter from Judge Whitfer's direction. I delivered the spring keynote here at Hartfield last year, at Dean Ibarra's invitation, and I've had the privilege of serving on the Engineering Review Board for the city's Infrastructure Bond Committee for the past 6 years. I raised my glass. My son-in-law is right that there's dignity in every kind of work. I'd add that there's also more to a person than what you can see from the outside. Congratulations on 10 years, I sat down. The room was very quiet for 2 seconds. Then someone started clapping and the rest followed. My son-in-law sat down slowly. His face had gone a particular color, not red, not pale. Something in between, like a man who has just understood he's been walking the wrong direction for a long time. Dean Ibarra leaned over from the next table and touched my arm. Beautifully, said Vincent. Judge Whitver caught my eye across the room and raised his glass an inch. My daughter's hand found mine under the table. My son-in-law did not speak for the rest of dinner. The drive home was quiet. My wife drove. I looked out the window at the lights of the city and thought about whether I had done the right thing and decided I had, and then tried not to think about it anymore. 3 days later, my son-in-law came to the shop alone. It was a Thursday afternoon. Augusto had gone to make a delivery. The shop was empty except for me, restocking ceramic samples on the back wall. I heard the door and turned around. He looked different than he usually did. Smaller, somehow. He was in his work clothes, tie loosened, the kind of man who looks uncertain when he's removed from the environment that makes him feel certain. Can I sit down? He asked. I gestured to the stool near the counter. He sat. He didn't speak right away. He looked at the samples, the catalogs, the old drafting table I kept in the corner with my equipment on it. I didn't know, he finally said. I know. You could have told me. I set down the tile I was holding. I could have. But you didn't ask. Not once. Not in 3 years. He didn't argue that. He looked at the floor. My father-in-law, he said quietly. That's what you were to me. A category. That's... He stopped. Started again. I've been treating your daughter like she should be embarrassed about where she comes from. And she never said anything to me because she loves me and she didn't want the fight. He looked up. That's not a marriage. No, I agreed. It isn't. He was quiet for a while. I owe you an apology. I know that's not sufficient. It's a start. He looked at me directly for the first time since he'd walked in. He had his mother's eyes, sharp, quick, but in that moment they just looked tired. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why did you let it go on so long? I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because I wanted to see what you were made of when you thought no one important was watching. I picked up another tile. And because my daughter loves you, and I was hoping I was wrong about what I was seeing. Were you? I turned the tile over in my hands. I think the man who walked into this shop today is different from the man who made that toast at the cocktail party. I think you know the difference. What you do with it is your business. He stood up. He extended his hand. I shook it. Thank you for not doing it worse, he said. You could have. I could have, I agreed. But that wasn't the point. After he left, I stood alone in the shop for a few minutes. The light through the front window was the color it gets in late afternoon, long and amber, the way it looks in October. I thought about my daughter, and about what it means to build something that lasts. A bridge, a marriage, a family, and how the engineering principles are not that different. You have to know what you're working with. You have to account for stress and load. You have to be honest about what the structure can hold. My daughter called me that evening. He talked to you, she said. He did. She was quiet for a moment. Is it going to be okay? I don't know, I said. That depends on him. What did you tell him? The truth, that there's still time to be a different kind of person if he decides to. Another silence. Then, Dad, why did you wait so long to say anything? At the dinner, I mean. You could have told me before. Told him before. I thought about the October light in my shop, about the tile samples on the wall, about 23 years of work that I'd been proud of and then let go of, willingly, because I wanted something smaller and quieter and mine. Because some things, I said, you have to let a person discover on their own. Telling him wasn't going to teach him anything. He needed to see it. She exhaled slowly. You're not as easy to read as you look, you know. Good, I said. I've been working on that for 67 years. She laughed. It was her real laugh, not the managed one I'd been hearing for too long. 6 months later, my son-in-law was reassigned to a new mentorship at his firm. A lateral move, not a demotion, though I suspect it was connected to a quiet conversation someone had with someone else. I don't know that for certain. I didn't make any calls. I didn't have to. What I know is that when the four of us had dinner at my house last Thanksgiving, he asked me genuinely about the Grantham Viaduct, what the engineering challenges were, what we had to solve for, what it felt like to finish something you knew would outlast you. We talked for an hour. My wife refilled our coffee cups twice and didn't interrupt. My daughter watched from across the table, and her face looked the way it used to look when she was small, and everything in the world was exactly where it was supposed to be. I still open the shop on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Augusto handles the scheduling. We did a bathroom renovation last spring that I'm genuinely proud of. Subway tile, heated floor, a niche I built by hand because the client wanted it just right and I had the time. Sometimes people ask me why I kept doing it. Why, after everything, I didn't go back to consulting full-time or teaching or any of the things that would look more impressive on paper. I tell them what I told my daughter. This is who I am now. The other thing was a career. This is a life. And some mornings, when the light comes through the front window at that particular angle, and I'm setting tile, and the whole shop smells like mortar and sawdust, and the coffee I made at 6 a.m., I think that of all the things I've built, bridges, viaducts, retaining walls designed to stand for 100 years, this quiet life chosen on purpose might be the one I'm most proud of.